now.
Is this Johanna?
See if we can figure out what's wrong with your phone. And yeah, I guess Johanna in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Are you there?
Hi.
Hi. How you doing?
Hi. I'm actually a theist. I was introduced to the show by a agnostic friend of mine. And I had a video I put up recently on YouTube, very unusual proof of the existence of God.
I can almost guarantee you that we're not going to watch it.
Well, let him explain what it is.
All right, I'll go ahead and explain the concept. He doesn't agree with it outright because he has problems with it, but he thought it was a very unusual argument, and he wanted me to bring on the show to see what you guys thought about it.
Unusual arguments for God. All right, let's go.
Yeah. So I'm in physics, right? That's my major. Now, there's a guy, I don't know if you've heard of him, Roger Penrose. Have you heard of that name?
The Emperor's New Mind?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, Road to
So
Reality.
you're familiar with the Orch-OR hypothesis, correct? The self-collapsing wave function?
Yeah, I actually kind of disagreed with a lot of the book that I was reading. I'm more of a Hofstadterian, but he's not a physicist. But I mean, I'm sort of a fan of the model of the mind that is discussed through a lot of essays in the mind's eye.
All right. Well, obviously, Penrose's thesis is very controversial, but let's just take it as true for sake of argument.
No.
Something very unusual comes out of it when you do this.
I'm sorry, but I mean, if we're going to build an argument on top of something that we're not sure is actually true or not...
Yeah, let's think of it as a hypothesis.
I'll make an argument.
Yeah, hypothetically. All right.
Yeah, let's think his hypothesis is...
Okay, so what are we assuming is true, first of all?
Okay, let's assume that the self-collapsing wave function mechanism is the same as consciousness, all right? Orchestrated objective reduction.
Okay, there's all kinds of fuzzy terms that are not going to be familiar to a bunch of people in the audience.
Yeah, we've got a bunch
starting with assuming that everyone knows what consciousness means.
Or self-collapsing wave functions. Or
Shall I explain the wave function concept?
What?
Yeah, if you want to, sure. I mean,
all right. So
if you want, sure.
Quantum wave function in quantum mechanics is where you have a particle when it's not observed, it exists in a set of possible positions all at once, and it's sort of mirrored out in a wave pattern.
Right.
And then once you observe the wave function, then I'm not going to. There's these idiots from What the Bleep Do We Know, which are that's pseudoscience.
Yeah,
but,
horrible movie.
You can observe it with either a mind or an inanimate piece of measuring equipment. And when you do this, what happens is that the wave function collapses and the particle only shows up in one place at a time, okay?
Okay.
So now, whatever the mental observation is, when we observe, we look out at the outside world, we see stuff comes down in our eyes, right? And we can make an observation of it somehow.
Our senses,
Very fundamental interaction.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so now, whatever that is physically the same as whatever it is that happens when the inanimate piece of equipment measures the wave function, right? Now, I'm not a dualist, so I'm not going to assume that there's, a matter and a mind. They're two separate things. It's all the same thing.
So you would agree
that we do when we observe things mentally.
Wait. So you would agree then that mind is the sort of patterns that happen on brain waves, basically.
I'm a neutral monist, actually. I'm a little unusual with this, but mind is it's a entangled mechanism in the middle of the microtubules.
All right, I think we're pretty close in agreement so far.
Okay, so now the observation mechanism is the same thing that is, with the inanimate piece of equipment, is the same mechanism that happens when an actual mind observes something. So now that being the case, wave function collapse can be physically equated with the process of mental observation. So now from that, if you have a self-observation, which is, we think of as consciousness, an ego or perhaps whatever, but when you have a self-observation, that would be a self-collapse of the wave function. Now, obviously, Penrose is very controversial. There's a whole lot of, people try and poke holes in various parts of it, but the gist of it is that you can then have a self-collapsing wave function, and that is equal to a self-observing wave function, which is therefore a mind, right?
Okay.
Okay, so that's the first part of the argument. The second part, now we're going to go step back a little bit, and we're going to go into, this is tied in with quantum gravity, but there's everything in the physical universe has wave functions, correct? You have anything that has energy has a wave function. Now, this includes the wave function of the whole universe.
So you've got, if I can clarify this, some more for non-nerds. When you have subatomic particles, you can't specifically say where they are and how fast they're moving, but you can sort of give a probability distribution of where they probably are, where they're most likely to be, how likely they are to be in particular places. And since everybody is made of very, very small particles, there is a really small but non-zero chance that extremely unusual things can happen when you average out all those wave functions. But since there are lots and lots of particles, the most likely thing becomes more and more likely to happen.
Okay.
Are you with me, Martin?
More or less. I mean, I get the feeling that a bunch of our viewers' eyes are probably glazing over with some of this arcane physics.
I am a little bit worried about that.
So it just can we sort of like do the short version? Are we leading up to?
We're close to the end right now.
Okay. Are we leading up to basically some kind of Schrodinger's God argument? Is that kind of where this is going?
Perhaps, yes.
Okay.
The argument was that there are two types of wave function collapse. The first is the normal one where you measure it with an outside particle. The second was the Orch-OR mechanism, which is consciousness. So now, we obviously can see observable stuff out in the universe, so therefore it's not all just fuzzy particle waves. So therefore, the wave function of the universe as a whole had to be collapsed. So we'll assume that some particle outside the universe bumped into it, measured it, and then collapsed it. Well, there's a problem with that statement, correct? If there's a particle outside the physical universe, then it would not be the physical universe anymore because the universe
I don't think
is
anything in quantum mechanics says anything about it having to be outside the physical universe.
Well, no, I'm saying this is not normal quantum mechanics. This is quantum gravity. We're dealing with the wave function of the whole universe, as I said.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we're drifting more and more off into hypothetical stuff that is
maybe
good science.
This is the starting point of a whole lot of quantum gravity models. This is like a kind of an axiom they start with when they try and hack at the model rather than, maybe this string theory or.
I'm just worrying that this is incomprehensible to the vast majority of our viewers.
Here's a problem that I'm anticipating with this, which is that as you get more and more into things that arguments for God tend to take the form that, something is true and it couldn't be true without a God existing, and therefore there must be a God. But as we get more and more into sort of hypothetical, abstract, cutting edge physics that nobody is absolutely sure about, the idea that so and so is true and therefore forces a God to exist. Doesn't apply anymore. I mean, you wind up having to say.
It's still hypothetical, you're saying. So
you wind up having to say this is probably true.
I will comment that the concept of the wave function of the universe is not that controversial. That's just like a kind of universally given with quantum gravity.
Yeah, and
the idea that there needs to be.
All I'm saying with my argument is that such a wave function exists.
Yeah, and while this is all certainly interesting to speculate upon, like I said, for physics guys late at night, when it's one of those where ultimately I don't think that it is that you're even talking in a realm that is the least bit relevant to people who are practicing believers, right? Believers in God, Christians, active churchgoers, just your the people at the tea parties, whoever, just Sunday go to meeting folks. When they think of the God they believe in, they're not thinking in terms of, why, yes, this whole notion of self-collapsing wave functions this really isn't the core of what's going on in actual religious belief. So while it's fascinating as some sort of intellectual abstruse exercise and thought experiments, it really doesn't get to the core of what real believers believe in, why they believe in it, and how it affects culture.
Another thing that seems to come out is that at the end of these kind of really abstruse, scientific sounding arguments, what you wind up with is now we have this thing and we'll call it God. But it doesn't really, but calling something a God doesn't really capture the full concept that most people have in mind when they say there is a God. When they talk about like whether there's a heaven and a hell, whether it answers prayers, whether things you do sexually are bad to it. If you can just take things and label them God, like you could say, oh, there's a particle outside the universe and I'll call it God. But that's not really more interesting than saying my cup is God.
Yeah, and again, to most believers, I think that an argument like this ultimately would feel very hollow to them, because to them God is not just some sort of a quantum particle doing quantum stuff, right? It's a big man who and he loves me, and he sent his son for me, and it's all very anthropomorphized and personal. And while we may dismiss that as silly and mythical and what have you, and a bunch of fables, that really is what's going on in the mind of actual believers.
Right.
That's the concept of God they take seriously.
Well, I mentioned at I'm just put this in my video. This is just a generic God I'm arguing for. This could be. I'm personally a panentheist, which is a little bit different than pantheism.
Okay.
The universe is within the mind of God, so it's compatible with. The argument I give itself is compatible. It could be either pantheism, deism. Pantheism. I mean, you could kind of modify it from there into sort of a
so I mean,
a religious, emanationist based.
I guess I'm less interested in how you get to some kind of scientific rationalization that there is a God, as knowing what you believe and why you believe it. As basically, what is the thing that you're calling God? Can you detail what its properties are? What is it like?
It's the wave function of the universe. It's self-collapsing.
Okay, well, let's say that I believe in the wave function of the universe, and I'll let you label it God. So what?
Okay.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
So then,
How have we learned anything new about the universe by sticking this three-letter word on it?
because we've now discovered that because of Orch-OR, it's a wave function, but it's also a mental wave function.
Well,
it's not a normal wave function where you just collapse it within a particle. Because there are no particles outside the universe, it has to be a self-collapsed wave function, which Penrose points out as a mind.
Right, but if I decided not to call it God, but instead I decided to call it Herman, am I losing any information from that?
No.
Okay.
It would still be a
right,
universal mind, though, which I thought was kind of a cool thing to let you guys chew on for a bit there.
I mean, it depends on what you consider a mind, and I mean, collapsing wave functions is something that things without minds also do, I think.
Right.
Yeah,
but I mean, again, it depends on the mind. So
the argument.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I mean, it's interesting. You're moving into esoteric territories that most actual believers don't really mess with. But yeah, again, I think that you're operating off of Penrose's premises, it does just seem like another way of finding stuff about the universe that you can call God. And until I know, as a scientific layman and as a layman in physics, until I see that there's some sort of that's a legitimate way of looking at the universe, if that's a way that increases my understanding of things, I'm, again, going to be wary to just sort of rush into it. So,
right.
Anyway,
thanks for calling.
If you wanted perhaps a religious component, and this is just a little side thing, this is something other things that, because actually there are a fair number of religious theists in the physics department. I'm not going to get into this right now, but just do a little research on Carl Jung and his association with the physicist Wolfgang Pauli. And I won't get into it now, but just dig out what you see and tell me if it's not a little weird. So
okay. I want to put you on hold because Mark Lowy, our token physicist, actually wanted to have a chat with you off the air. And we're going to move on to other callers. I do recommend The Emperor's New Mind. It's a really interesting book that covers a lot of scientific disciplines, and then it makes some out there claims that some people aren't sure about. But he's a very well written guy. So thanks for calling.
Thanks, Johan.
yes, sir. Nice
Bye.
to be here.
Yeah.